Welcome back to the Multifamily webinar series. My name's Kendrick Bradley, and in this series, we dive into the real challenges operators face on the day-to-day. Now, today's conversation is all about navigating multiple strategic initiatives in multifamily. And if you're in operations right now, this one probably hits really close to home. Across marketing, operations, revenue management, there's a lot of things that multifamily operators need to juggle. There's new systems, new expectations, and KPIs. And over the last 5 years, there's been a lot of initiatives, a lot of new tools. And the challenge isn't just having great ideas, it's actually understanding what's most important, what can wait, and how to execute without overwhelming or stalling teams. So today we're going to talk about things like how do leaders prioritize when everything feels urgent? How do you balance a short-term strategy with some long-term operational initiatives? And how do you make sure teams feel aligned, focused, and energized along the way? Because oftentimes these initiatives can be disruptive to operations. So let's dive into it.
My name is Matthew Busch. I am the Director of Strategic Initiatives at RADCO Living, a property management company. I oversee all things implementations from the big ideas to execution. I handle all corporate communications for the company. And then outside of my work with RADCO, I am a professional actor and director with over 20 years of experience in the theater world. It's a little fun fact there.
Amazing. Such a diverse range of experience. And so tell me, I'm curious, how does theater and multifamily work well together?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think, in my time spent in the theater world, you have really learned to listen deeply. And I think one of the things as an actor, you're really listening to understand rather than to respond. And that's something that's easily translatable, not only to multifamily, but to the real world. As humans, we have a tendency to listen to respond. We're already kind of formulating our response to something that somebody is saying. But when you have that mindset shift to really listen to understand, it really helps you to kind of be engaged in the conversation. As a director in theater, it's really similar to what I do here at RADCO as the Director of Strategic Initiatives, right? You're kind of playing with all the different pieces to put together one big, large project. There's a number of different people involved, from the lighting designer, the sound designer, the set designer, to the actors. But as the director, I have to step back and look at the big picture and make sure all the pieces fall where they may. I'm not responsible for just one little portion of it. I'm responsible for the entire outcome. So it's been a really interesting way for me to leverage my experience in professional theater and translate that into the multifamily industry.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I really resonate with the part about listening, right? Because I think, us on the vendor side, a lot of times we're listening with a preconceived notion of what we want to build, right? Because as a builder, you have an idea of what you want to build, and it's far too easy to build the thing that you want to do rather than really listening deeply to what's actually needed, right? And that's that idea of deep empathy and not coming with a preconceived notion of what you want and what you think that they want. And I think that idea of deep listening is super translatable. And as we were talking about, I myself did theater. And I do think those skills are very much learned in theater. And even I would say character development, when you're acting, right? You have to really have deep empathy to try and understand these profiles, these people, these individuals that have an entirely different perspective and way of operating that you yourself would have a hard time understanding, and going that level of emotional, tactical empathy, I think is something that is a very, very useful skills for all industries and just human connection, human behavior, and business overall. So I love that you touched on that. I know that's a little bit different than what we were talking about today, but I think it really does connect, right? It is, it allows you to orchestrate these strategic initiatives effectively. I'm wondering, as you think about the last, 12 to 18 months, what's changed about strategic initiatives, and what have you seen from how things have been developing?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, the timeline of 12 to 18 months, because that's the exact amount of time that I have been in this role currently. So it's difficult for me to kind of discuss what was happening prior to me being in this role, because I don't really have much of an idea. However, I think it's really interesting that my role was created and I was placed in it right along that timeline. So I think the multifamily industry is always evolving. And I think one of the biggest keywords that I've heard over the past couple of years is centralization, right? And so I think there was a real need for multifamily companies to figure out what centralization meant to them, whether it was large scale, it was small scale, et cetera, et cetera. And so a lot of the things that I have been working on since I've been placed in my role for about a year and a half touch on centralization in some form or manner. And so I think what has changed the most in the past, call it 12 to 18 months, is there are so many new technologies coming out at a rapid pace that all either do the same thing or overlap. And so I think for a lot of multifamily operators, it's been really difficult to kind of wade through the noise and figure out what problem are we trying to solve versus something that's shiny and new that we want to try out. So I think with the ever evolving landscape changing with AI, centralization, processes, and workflows, that's pretty much, the volume and the complexity of every initiative continues to grow and evolve as the shape of technology and multifamily continues to evolve.
100%. There's now more shiny new technologies out there, more vendors than you even know how to keep up with. So it's important to have a strategy there. And I'm curious, what is your strategy? You said you've been in the role for a little over a year. What's your strategy? How do you choose the initiative, and what do those initiatives look like, right? When you're actually choosing an initiative, is it around a vendor? Is it around, a specific metric that you're trying to move within the company? Talk us through how you think about those initiatives, because I know not every company has a role like yours, but people want to launch initiatives. So I think your thoughts would be really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a number of different things, right? Sometimes we see a lot of things come through the pipeline based on a relationship that one of our leaders has with a vendor, and they want us to look at a new technology. Other things bubble up just based on a business need, right? We are dropping the ball somewhere. Let's solve for that problem. And then what is out in the market to help us solve for that? But I think a lot of it really comes from the fact that people want to change and shift, and they want to evolve the way that they're operating. And so really what I do is I take ideas and I try to solve for them, and then I implement what I believe is the best way forward to solve for a problem. And so the way I kind of categorize all these different initiatives that I have, I kind of own and manage a major smart sheet that tracks every single thing from a very minor idea to a huge overhaul of a process or a procedure. And I assign those different levels based on prioritization, based on an existing relationship. But really the biggest thing for me is, what problem are we trying to solve? And let me solve for that, rather than let's just investigate this software because we like it and it's shiny and brand new, or let's do this because it's an easy win. It always boils down to, what is the issue? What is the best way forward to try to solve for that? It's change management. Really.
Yeah, I really like that. I think oftentimes people go too quickly into solutioning, or like, oh, let's try this solution, or like, this seems like an interesting solution. And, oftentimes it's missed. It's like, are we actually solving a problem with the solution, or do we just like the solution, right? And so I like the idea of starting with the problem. I'm wondering, it's easy to point out problems in a business, but how do you take that problem into a solutioning space, or be different ideas on how to solve that problem? Because I think that's one of the cruxes of getting this right, is like, what path forward is there, right? And I think I've always had a perspective that, multifamily has been an industry that has been very aware of problems, but not willing to do the hard work and rethinking from the ground up the entire process, right? You can think about, from my perspective in our space, it's, the AI automation space. And I think all too often companies want to automate a relatively shoddy process that like they've been doing for a long time, rather than think about, wait, why are we even doing those things? What is the actual end goal that we want, that we're trying to achieve here, right? Do we really need to be sending 10 different follow-up messages? Like, are we trying to spam people? Like, but that's what everyone's been told to do on the operations team, is like, do these email cadence, or do this thing. And it's like, no, we don't, that's not really what we're trying to do. Otherwise, we're just going to be automating a shoddy process, right? And so I'm wondering how you think about kind of breaking down the problem into the potential solutions, and how creative you can get there.
Yeah, I mean, I have a tendency to try to look at it from all angles, right? You do want to drill down and find out what the ultimate problem that you're attempting to solve for is, but there are so many factors in play when you're drilling down that far, right? How does it affect the end consumer, our resident, right? Are they satisfied with the way that we're conducting business? How does it affect the frontline on-site team members? Are they just frustrated with way too many changes, or are they feeling like they have buy-in and they have say in what we're doing as an organization? How do you balance the different departmental initiatives that, if marketing wants to do their own thing, L&D wants to do their own thing, HR wants to do their own thing? How do you kind of balance all of that change throughout the organization? And then also, I have found that a lot of initiatives, whether they be big or small, have an overlap. And so, how can you kind of either combine strategic initiatives into kind of one large overhaul, or how do you roll them out individually so that people can see the big picture of the why? I think transparency is really important for me, but also for the organization. Having that buy-in from your team members to really have them understand why you're doing something is going to make it such a smoother rollout than if you just say, here's the way we operate now, and don't allow anybody to ask questions or provide feedback, because that's where you get kind of complacency from your team. So it's kind of all over the place, really, for me. I just kind of find the best path forward based on what I know about what's happening in the organization and how large or small of a change this is going to be to our processes and procedures, and where we can find opportunities for streamlining and combining things so that you don't have to do change management all year long.
I'm wondering, like there's so many different dimensions to making an initiative successful. And I'm sure you've had successes and failures. I'm wondering what cautionary tales do you have around why initiatives have failed or stumbled, so others can avoid this and also be aware.
Yeah, what I have learned in my role is to really put together a project plan prior to implementing anything. Sometimes there can be a lot of pressure to get things rolled out very quickly, but I have learned, instead of flying by the seat of my tail, to go ahead and do all the pre-work up front and assign true ownership to things, right? Who's going to be responsible for the execution, who's going to be responsible for answering the questions afterwards, ultimately who is the decision maker, and is that different than the contract signer? So making sure that everybody involved in the organization in some capacity has an idea that this is happening, so it doesn't halt when it gets to a specific point in the process.
Yeah, we've seen that as well. I mean, I think like when an organization can be aligned, we just see everything go so much more smoother, and it being so much easier to work with that organization, because oftentimes initiatives really do require cross-functional buy-in. And oftentimes if someone's just like rogue and like implementing something, being like, hey, we want to try this, and they don't have the right buy-in from the executive staff, from the on-site staff, then it gets stalled out, it gets cut, and it's just a giant waste of time from everybody, really. And oftentimes it leaves a frustration. So I think that having a clear ownership and clear buy-in and an understanding from all folks involved, even before the initiative kicks off, is really, really important. It gives people from all different departments, whether it's IT, whether it's the site teams, regionals, executive, an opportunity to voice their opinion, and also collective ownership, right? It's like, hey, we are doing this because of this reason. We all want this to succeed, and we've done all this proper homework beforehand. And so we're giving it an honest shot, rather than it's like, oh, it's, Matthew's pet project, and, he never got buy-in. And so there's other folks in the organization that are kind of like maybe egotistically just being like, yeah, I don't want it to succeed. I never thought it was going to be a good idea anyway. And so these very human type dimensions actually really matter, right? Because if someone's trying to subvert the initiative, it's in the organization for whatever reason, then it's probably going to be a painful process, and potentially just cut down. And then it's like, well, why are we even doing this? It's like, why am I wasting my time doing this? And as you're nodding your head, it sounds like you've had experiences like this, and you know what we're talking about. And on the vendor side, it's equally frustrating. So I love that. I think like the getting that a collective buy-in and putting that pre-work in beforehand really just makes it that much more likely to be successful.
Exactly.
As far as like, just tools and the, vendors and the array of tools, I think there's been a promise that like software and tools would make the residents' life and an on-site team's life easier. But in many cases, it's actually made it more fragmented, right? There's like 5 different steps for everything. There's a portal here, a portal there. The residents have to like log into 7 different portals. So do on-sites, maybe 18. What's your perspective there? Are you ever worried about new initiatives bringing in new, more complex processes or complex steps?
Always. Yeah, that is always at the top of my list when I'm, asking the questions at the beginning of a project. I am firmly in the camp that we should streamline our systems as much as possible to avoid having to train team members on multiple platforms. If there's one platform that can do 4 things versus having 4 separate platforms, we are more than likely going to end up there. Just because from a training standpoint, it's really important for our teams to be trained on the appropriate platforms, but also to alleviate them from, like you said, having to log into multiple different things. Another kind of, a kink that gets thrown in is we operate in the third-party management space. And so sometimes a lot of things will be driven by our clients. They will come to us and say, we want this software. And so while that can be looked at in a negative manner, sometimes it actually proves quite good because they are coming to us wanting us to pilot something at their properties. And it ends up being one of the greatest softwares we've ever seen. And then we end up rolling it out company-wide if it really solves the problem they aimed it to solve. But I'm always firmly in the camp that we should streamline our systems as much as possible just to alleviate having to train on multiple different platforms because it just adds so much burden to everybody's day to day when you have to train them on so many different things.
Yeah, I'm really interested in that, in the fact that it can be challenging working as a fee manager with owners bringing so many different tools and demanding that they be used. It sounds like it's a great sort of, I guess, wedge into seeing new tools, but it also can be, handcuffing in the fact that you have so many different processes and so many different tools across the entire portfolio to manage. It also could make it harder to deploy an initiative, right? Let's say, you have an initiative you want to roll out or test and you test it on a specific portfolio, but then you got to go solicit buy-in from the other ownership groups. I think the audience would love to understand, how you manage this and how you think about this, a third-party operator, right? Because I think as an owner operator, it's much more simple a lot of times. You have one way of operating, you have one PMS system, you have one suite of tools, and therefore you have kind of one operating layer across the entire portfolio. How do you manage strategic initiatives as being a fee manager?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so obviously, as an organization, we have to have our non-negotiables, right? Like we have our PMS. That is our PMS. We are not changing that for any type of new business, just because that fundamentally alters every single process in our organization, from the on-site team members to my corporate accounting team, right? There are so many things that we rely on within our PMS. So to us, that's one of those non-negotiables. But if a client comes to us and has an idea for a new market survey platform, that's something pretty easy that you can get set up, you can test it out. As long as it's automated, our team members aren't working in their day-to-day. They're setting up reports to be sent to them and then utilizing that data in one of our existing systems. So you just kind of take it as they come and you have an understanding of what problem they're trying to solve. And if there's an existing relationship with a vendor that they have that they'd like to honor, I always look at those as positive things that are coming to my plate, because it is a means for us to test out a new technology or a new workflow that could fundamentally change the way we operate as a business in a positive manner. Obviously, not all of them are going to be. So I take those and I pilot them and we'll do what we can. And if we like it, then we have a larger discussion about this solved a problem here at this specific portfolio. Are we interested in looking at, launching this company wide? And more times than not, the answer becomes yes. We are always open to new ideas, new softwares, new technologies. We just want to make sure that we vet it and pilot it first to ensure that it solves the problem it was aiming to solve.
Totally. Makes a lot of sense. And I guess probably the audience is wanting to know a few clicks deeper into the actual nuts and bolts of what have been some really successful strategic initiatives you've done over the last year, and what are you looking forward to, and what's on the top of your list looking forward?
Yeah, so I mean, I think at the beginning of this, I mentioned centralization. We did a very big centralized push starting a little over 2 years ago now. So I played a large part in centralizing some of the rote and routine tasks that our on-site team members were doing. The goal of it was to really remove the kind of day-to-day data entry tasks and have them be more focused on the relationship building with the residents at our communities. So we had the idea to centralize a lot of the lease generations, the processing of the move-ins and the move-outs, the ledger adjustments, so that our on-site team members could really focus on the relationship with the residents rather than having to worry about troubleshooting or solving issues on their behalf. So that's something that we rolled out here not too long ago that I was really excited to do. Another large project that I had completed, which wasn't technically like a rollout or an initiative, but with the amount of change we've had in our organization, we have over 300 standard operating procedures. And through different people coming and joining and leaving the organization, nobody was really owning that. And so I stepped in to own that. And it was really important to me that we went one by one and that I got buy-in from team members to adjust every single one of our SOPs. So I hosted a 3-day boot camp and got all of my senior leaders in a room for 3 days to really go through one by one and make sure that our SOPs still made sense with how we were operating as a company. And the cherry on top of that is because I came from the talent development team, I understood that our on-site team members are really at the forefront of our business every day. And so it was really important to me to get leasing consultants in the room, to get property managers in the room, to get maintenance technicians in the room, because they're going to be the key subject matter experts there by telling us if the SOP aligns with, the day-to-day operations on site. And so I think that was a really great experience for not only my on-site team members to kind of see how decisions are made at a corporate level, but also for my corporate team members to have an understanding of, hey, we're not conducting business in the way that we're expecting our team members to. So how can we adjust these policies and procedures to reflect what is actually happening on site? And that was a major win, not only for me, but for the organization.
That's honestly, so many other companies need to do that. It's just surprising to see the disconnect. And as an AI operations provider and centralization provider, it's just astonishing, right? And I think it's so critical for everyone to be on the same page, because all too often the executive team is like, this is our SOPs. And then the regional over here says, this is our SOP. The leasing agent is actually doing it this way, or the operations team is actually doing it this way. And, there's a complete disconnect. So it's very, very important for companies to be aligned with this is, having a uniform process if they want to. And then the pieces that are not uniform are specific because of a specific state compliance reason. And people need to be much more aligned. So you could have that as a service to do that for other property management organizations, and that would be amazing because I know exactly what you're talking about, and it is essentially critical. I love the fact that you brought people that are regionals and even LCs into the room, because that's so important. There are valid reasons that some teams are doing it something a way different than what corporate envisioned or imagined theoretically the best way to do it. Love that. And I would say anybody listening to this, definitely go do that. That's just going to it's going to pay dividends for your operations teams.
Well, I guarantee you.
Guarantee you. Well, awesome. Are there any tidbits or nuggets of, golden nuggets of things for other people that are thinking about launching strategic initiatives that you would impart them with?
I think there's a difference between somebody who sees big picture and somebody who is very detail oriented. I was put in my role because I'm the detail oriented guy. I think when you look at kind of executive leadership in any industry, not just multifamily, but it's very big picture focused, right? They're focused on the strategy. They're focused on kind of the larger scheme of operations as a company. And so having somebody like me that is very detail oriented and is not afraid to ask what may be very stupid questions in a role such as the Director of Strategic Initiatives, there's a really great partnership that occurs between myself and executive leadership, because they come to me with these big ideas and I'm able to understand what their goal is, but then I can put pen to paper and ask the questions and figure out the problem that we're trying to solve and suggest the best path forward, and being as detail oriented as I can throughout the process so that we're ironing the kinks before any type of strategic initiative gets launched or gets close close enough to roll out so that you can troubleshoot at the top of it rather than shipping and iterating where you just roll it out and solve afterwards. So I highly recommend anybody in the multifamily industry to have somebody in a role similar to mine that is a project manager, right? Have a detail-oriented rock star in your organization that is responsible for seeing rollouts to completion, but making sure that that person has the authority to speak up, raise their hand, ask questions, and say, we need to pause on this until we actually go back to the drawing board.
I love that. Totally makes a lot of sense to me. And I think the being detail oriented is something like this role really needs to be able to like bring an idea into actualization, right? And that's not just by talking ideas and asking other people to do things. It's really getting into the nitty gritty. So
Right.
I love that. Well, thank you, Matthew. I really appreciate this. This has been great.
Of course.
So that's our session for today. Navigating these strategic initiatives isn't about doing everything. It's about doing the right things in the right order with clarity and intention. And trust me, that goes a long ways. You know, the strongest multifamily teams aren't necessarily the busiest, but they're really the most aligned, right? And that's at an executive team level, regional, and all the way down to the site level. So just want to say thank you to the panelists for sharing their real world perspective and navigating these challenges. My name's Kendrick Bradley, and we'll see you on the next webinar.